Hey, shh. Things are gonna get going in just 3, 2, 1. Okay, happy days! Thank you for deciding to watch a video called What We Watched Last Week. It is as it sounds like. We are just talking about the things we watched last week or listened to or read. We keep it a little loosey-goosey. This is just a show about spreading a little love for the things we love, and I do love stories. And please do not think anything here is intended to be any sort of in-depth criticism or review of anything we are discussing. Even if there are some criticisms in there, it doesn't mean everything is not absolutely appreciated. A little bit of context though for this week. I do have a Netflix video coming up this Friday, so I rejoined the Netflixes, for the month anyway, but in that month it's going to be a whole lot of taking advantage of what I missed on the platform while I was away. So shall we get into what we watched last week of June? Batman Bad Blood from 2016. The culmination of the little Damian Wayne Batman trilogy of the DC AMU. So naturally we need to introduce no less than 3 new main cast members. After Batman gets seemingly got, the friendly neighborhood Dick steps up to put on the cowl while Damian Wayne and a few new faces figure out where Bruce Wayne has been the whole movie. Talia al Ghul shows back up to complete Damian's little arc, along with a newer muscle guy to punch at in the Heretic. Not only does the story try and cram in as many characters as possible, but the camera framing does as well. If you know anything about the studio's animation quality and crowds, you know why that was a problem. There is 1 or 2 really well animated action sequences, but the ones that count definitely do not land in part because of how many people there are to animate on the screen at once. It is great to see the son of Batman get his own arc. These really were his movies, just for some reason the camera kept itself centered on his dad the whole time. Volcano from 1997. In case you were wondering how they did most of this movie, the answer is miniatures. Just about the answer to everything before 1999 is miniatures, really. They needed the minis because this is a movie about a volcano that just pops up in the middle of the LA tar pits. We get 3 acts out of that. A quick first act where we don't really believe there is a volcano, a pretty meaty second act about banding together to stop a slow lava flow of destruction, followed by a big third act climax of... dropping a building on it. All centered around a Tommy Lee Jones-like city manager being a combination of sad, concern, and, yelling at lava. Outside of the whole third act dropping a building on the volcano thing, the movie does well to sell the seriousness of the more out-there-than-not idea of a volcano unexpectedly popping up in the middle of a major city. Everyone on the cast sells it exceptionally well, even if it gets a touch melodramatic in its theming of bringing everyone in, together. Pre-9/11 disaster movies are just built different. The focus on putting differences aside to fight and overcome the disaster over hyper-patriotism or escaping and merely survive is refreshing, and by just being so earnest. The movie's biggest oofs an audience might have is, again, it being a little melodramatic and dumb, but I don't know what else you go to a disaster movie for, really. I mean, probably disasters, but you also get a lot of that. Again, in miniatures. One Piece. Film Red from 2022. Uta has to be the most realistically designed woman, proportionally wise, that Oda has ever designed for One Piece. That's great. He should keep doing it. He should do it more, actually. I could talk about the plot of Film Red. It's about the Straw Hat Pirates getting out of the movie's big bad devil fruit-powered sphere of influence. It just so happens that the sphere of influence is reality warping and musical-based, so the plot is kind of thrown out the window, and that isn't a bad thing. It's visually stunning with an outstanding amount of musical numbers throughout, some of which set to the action set pieces that make for the best in the series to let just kind of wash over you. This makes any kind of story structure kind of incoherent. Characters just show up when they need to, but who cares? We have another song to sing and a flashback to fade into. 2013's Justice League: The Flashpoint Paradox. Imagine being told your job for the next 2 weeks was to animate 7 children being murdered. I really hope whoever had that job in this movie is doing okay. Getting to the point, though, we get to follow Barry Allen Flash learning that when you muck about with the timeline to save your mom, you might accidentally cause a world-destroying global conflict between 2 magical, isolated superpowers. Normal life lessons. This does work really well as a Flash movie, so much so that they retold the story as the Flash movie for Snyder's universe of events. It works Less so as an introduction to the DC animated universe here, though, considering nothing from this story's conclusion carries over to the new universe the Flash generates in the end. Especially in the art style. Across the board, we get very top-heavy designs that, make it look like everyone skipped leg day. I think pretty funny for a movie where the main hero just runs. Designs I'm not particularly in love with, but that is more of a me issue because it might be the best animated movie, like animation quality-wise, the studio has put out. It makes for a really interesting adaptation of one of the Flash's more important and iconic stories that does enough to stand apart from both the comic book original and the live-action fever dream to be worth its merit. Doctor Who, Galaxy 4 from 1965. Let me know if you've heard this one before. After the TARDIS crew lands and walks out of their ship, they are caught between two alien races locked in conflict, only to find the moralities of each side to not be necessarily what they seem. This edition, it's Femalians, the Dwarvins, versus the domed robots that are definitely not the Daleks. The domed robots are, just kind of drones for the prettiest aliens you can imagine. They call them the Rills here. It is an old story to see how our new companions will fare in a similar situation to the previous crew, really. Steven especially gets to put his foot down and put the Dwarvins in their place, which I feel don't give off the best vibes now. Despite the context it might have originally been filmed with, this feels like a particularly anti-feminist episode, which feels weird even in a first Doctor story. I have a copy of the 2021 animated release of the serial in black and white, but I do know the animation is also available on Tubi to be enjoyed in color. Either way, I don't think it's the most engaging animated serial. I think in large part due to the largely unexciting backdrops mixed with the less than dynamic character animations. I think I slightly prefer the animation we got in Reign of Terror, but either way, I am way more happy to have an animated version of this story than I would be to have without it. Rebel Moon, Part 1, A Child of Fire from 2023. Now, I thought it was just a joke that Zack Snyder pitched this as a Star Wars movie, but I guess that is true, which is weird since Star Wars riffed off Seven Samurai both before and after Snyder would have made this pitch to Disney. For all it's worth, Rebel Moon does stand itself apart as an epic in scale sci-fi retelling of the Seven Samurai by taking that already long for a movie story and stretching it even further, taking the movie's entire runtime to build that team of 7 warriors and add a little fake conclusion so the next movie can focus on the whole defending the village from space Nazis thing that kicked off the plot to begin with, I presume. As always, I think Zack Snyder is excellent in depicting this grand scope in his movies. His filmmaking style, love it or hate it, makes a random village on a random planet feel like the most important place in the galaxy. I just would not say the same for things like story and character writing. But what about Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver from 2024? Picking up right where Part 1 ended, Part 2 of Rebel Moon does fulfill that unsaid promise to give us 7 samurai in space, where the 5 space warriors assembled in Part 1 join up with the 2 that have been hanging around in the village since the beginning of that same movie, all in the aims to train a little village to fade off space Nazis who now want more than just the people's wheat this time around. Outside of some odd direction in the early flashbacks, the second installment I found to be a little more engaging than the first, honestly, while still taking its time to lament on the people we are fighting for and what they represent. Director Zack Snyder continues to be excellent with his use of imagery and scale. I feel like the story would have worked better without everything added to build the world beyond its main influence, but I also understand why Snyder wanted to make this his own. Even if I don't love everything that was added, I do want to see what comes next in the Rebel Moon story. 1962's King Kong versus Godzilla. Not the other way around. Imagine having to be sewn into the King Kong suit only to nearly drown in it along with your friend in the Godzilla suit. That has to be the worst day of work. But we came here to see King Kong fight Godzilla, right? Well, first you have to watch a pretty fun comedy of errors with a couple of pharmaceutical reps hunting down the titular King Kong in order to get him from point A to point B, while the titular Godzilla slowly walks himself from point C to point B, culminating in a monkey suit on lizard suit fight that ultimately leads to the plot to just kind of conclude itself. From what I understand, the shift in tone from the half-seriousness of Godzilla Raids Again to the slapstick comedy with suit wrestling was largely due to the success of Mothra from Ishiro Honda, director of both this installment as well as the extra downer original. If the whole Big Pharma and ratings plot was not so fun and constantly relevant and just well done. This might have not have been the big success that truly launched Godzilla's dominance on the screen throughout the Showa era. Not that any of the kaiju moments on screen are not fun with well done miniatures, they just might have some of the worst rear projected sequences in the series, which is a real problem because it can't not take you out from the picture for at least a time. So apparently the kid who played Aang had to have dentures because his baby teeth kept falling out. Can you imagine having to get dentures for your baby teeth because you are literally a child and your teeth are failing during a production? Because that sounds awful. Please, please, please never insult child actors or just children in general. What is wrong with you? They have so much they already have going on camera, but it is admirable Netflix opted to cast actual children for their live-action retelling of a preteen standing between a genocide and an army of people born with powers that would constitute them getting mutant collars in the X-Men universe. This live-action adaptation makes a lot of changes. Most of those changes don't make much sense story-wise outside of budget restraints. There's no reason we need to smash 3 stories together into one other than we don't want to build 7 more sets an episode. It is much cheaper if you just have everyone stand in a circle in the volume together. And I legitimately forgot both Momo and Appa were characters at one point because animating 2 flying fur babies is expensive. In contrast, there are a lot of changes made to character motivation that feel intentional to the story in a way that I am looking forward to see where the new versions of the characters I have loved since childhood end up in the end of this journey. Honestly, every character is so drastically different from their animated counterparts that it took me a while to be sold on what the series had to offer, but it did sell me in the end. Well, every character except for 2, Uncle Iroh and the Cabbage Merchant, the 2 cornerstones of the Avatar universe. Madam Web from 2024. Sony really didn't foresee this not going over well at the box office. A movie about a protagonist trying to control her future-predicting powers while saving a handful of much more interesting future protagonists we never get to see flourish from a legally distinct Spider-Man. It's not that this movie failed because of a female-led cast. It told, I think, a really interesting story around someone trying to figure out how to benefit from being able to final destination your future at will. It's just that in its requirements to be related to Spider-Man, the damsels in distress are just 5 times more interesting than the protagonist. 2016's Justice League vs. the Teen Titans, and I love that in this movie they strategically insert Blue Beetle into the Teen Titans team as a Cyborg alternate from the original run, only to have Cyborg be a main player on the team anyway. But this isn't a movie about Cyborg or Blue Beetle, it's a movie about Robin, learning about teamwork and the power of friendship with the backdrop of the Teen Titans fighting the Justice League because of some magic brain weasels that make everyone evil. Well, not everyone, just Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash. And we just end up having to take out one of them in the end. I feel like I would appreciate the promised story much more if it wasn't done so much better in Young Justice just a few years before. Not that the continuing journey of Damian Wayne is not well done in its own right, it just doesn't hold the movie up, and the B-plot that ends up taking the movie's title never really truly delivers as promised. This is a movie, though, that takes full advantage of the studio's weaknesses, and it makes for one of the better movies as far as animation quality from what I can tell. More of the action sequences stand out with quality character animation since the crew isn't animating huge crowds at the same time. 1980s Friday the 13th. Now, we all know what Friday the 13th is about. Cabin counselors getting got, not by a unit in a hockey mask, but by a mystery killer hiding in the bushes throughout the production. The movie is more beautiful than it has any right to be thanks to the crazy amount of nature photography we get as padding between the intentionally one-dimensional characters getting mutilated by the special effects of Tom Savini. Not that every actor isn't doing everything they have with the script provided. And as much as I appreciate an even lower budget Halloween derivative, this is a movie eclipsed by and approved upon in nearly every way throughout its sequels, except for maybe that mystery element. And those aren't even high art either, but at least they're fun. Doctor Who, Mission to the Unknown from 1965. Ooh, we get a story completely devoid of the TARDIS and the Doctor meant to set up the next 16-episode multi-story arc the Doctor goes on? Okay. Our protagonists in this episode are a couple of randos on a mission to sabotage the Daleks. Master plan, if you would believe it. Too bad they keep getting pricked by thorns that straight up make you want to kill your buddies. Oh, and the doctors are rolling around in the background for good measure, mastering said plan. Good news is, unlike other Lost episodes, because of the cast lacking recognizable characters, there is a well-done, officially recognized shot-for-shot remake available on the official Doctor Who YouTube channel. Bad news is this episode is just setup. with a largely inconsequential if well-done sci-fi tragedy main plot. The Devil's Bath from 2024. Who could have guessed that basically retelling the daily lives of women in the 1700s would be a horror movie in and of itself? Me. I think I could have pretty easily made that call. Throughout The Devil's Bath, we follow a newlywed and the day-to-day monotony of generally existing in a time where everything is hard and miserable, and there is simply no reprieve. It makes for an excruciatingly slow burn of a movie that is deliberate and effective in portraying the complex concept of, unaliving by proxy. All while some of the most beautifully drab shots of the rural Austrian countryside are just rolled across the screen. It makes for a really good tragedy that I am not going to be revisiting anytime soon, but equally don't regret spending a minute of my time on. It is just a well-acted and executed concept from beginning to end. In a Violent Nature from 2024. Now, I am confident I am not the first person to say this, but this is what happened when you make A. Jason the lead of his own movie. You get the Rosencrantz Guildenstern Ardette of horror movies, watching all the parts you wouldn't normally see while the traditional protagonists do the protagonist shenanigans you've seen a dozen times in the background. Long, slow scenes of beauty and nature while walking through the forest until something catches our ear, followed by gratuitous acts of violence. I cannot help but love a production that is so deliberate from beginning to end. Everything presented does exactly what I imagine the director intended. It makes for a movie that is more about horror and dissecting the slasher subgenre while creating a legally distinct character that can, and I hope will, stand on its own throughout time. Yeah, okay, thank you for sitting with me talking about what we watched last week. I hope everyone got to watch something special and fun last week in their own right, and I'd love to hear about whatever it is. Y'all are the best, and again, I don't foresee another really delay in getting a video up next week, and again, if I mentioned any YouTube channels, they will absolutely be linked in the description, but I think I am going to call it and turn the camera off now. Before I go, just a reminder to go out and do something good today, please. Thank you. Getting out of the movie's big bad devil fruit-powered sphere of influence. Say that 5 times fast. We still recording? We are still recording. Yay!